Claudia here. First up, I'm sorry for the overexposure of this clip. I got a new light and forgot to adjust my camera to it. But what you were supposed to see here was my sketch that I had already transferred to the watercolor paper. I used differently colored pencils for the separate areas, and I believe I never bothered erasing them after inking because it wasn't necessary to do so. They blended completely in. The ink I used here was a concoction made from magenta and cyan to create a nice deep purple, because purple is pretty much the main color of this piece. And I didn't say anything of the actual subject of this painting yet, even though it's the most important thing. So I got talked into participating in Artfight this year by my friend Blahmage, who is also here on YouTube. If you don't know what Artfight is, it's kind of a draw this in your style competition, where its participants are sorted into two opposing teams. You can then, but you don't have to, upload original character designs that others can pick and, well, draw in their style. Drawing characters from the opposing team gains points for your team, and in the end, the team with the most points wins, naturally. And to my absolute surprise, the team I ended up in actually won. So the character that I selected completely at random is called Taravan Twosong, created by Atmoth. I'm of course going to link to Atmoth's Artfight profile and their other socials in the description. Go and follow them for their cool art. What drew me to this design was for sure that color scheme of purple and gold and his mischievous expression, and the fact that he wasn't a furry or had animalistic features. It's simply not my personal preference, but if that's something for you, then Artfight is an absolute goldmine. I did not think these designs were that popular, but then again, people have been mixing humans with animals in art for millennia, so I really shouldn't be surprised. So Taravan is one of Atmoth's Dungeons & Dragons characters and a tiefling, I think? Maybe? I'm tempted to ask, do I look like someone who plays pen and paper role-playing games? But that's a stupid question, because the answer is clearly yes. Yes, I do. I'd been playing this stuff for many years, just not Dungeons & Dragons, so please excuse my ignorance. My exposure with this system has been mostly through tangential stuff like various video games. And my sister had one of the rulebooks that I definitely browsed through. I think it was 3rd edition, but don't pin me down on that. It's for sure outdated by now, and I don't know if my sister actually ended up using it herself. If you're wondering what I did play for years, that was a German system called Das Schwarze Auge, which literally translates to the black eye. Since it's not meant to be about bruises, although every hero collects many of them, that one time they tried to make an English version, they went with the dark eye. Don't mind me if I'm going to refer to Dungeons & Dragons as DnD and the dark eye as DSA from now on, out of laziness. And yes, I'm pronouncing DSA in German because DSA just feels wrong. Unless you're a German speaker, you're probably not familiar with the Dark Eye, but it's also a classic fantasy-based game like D&D. As I don't have any insight into the current rules of D&D, I can't tell you how much the two systems differ in that area, except that from the very beginning, the results on the D20 are switched. And every time I see someone in a D&D-like setting roll a 20, I go, oh no, until I realize it's something good. I don't know if that was done to set DSA apart from D&D, since the latter is 10 years older, or if the creators just felt it made more sense that way. In the end, it doesn't matter anyway, as long as the overall gameplay is balanced and both systems have gone through numerous revisions anyway. And the Dark Eye isn't a direct copy of Dungeons & Dragons, not just because of the different rules. There's of course some overlap with some species and classes, you know, like dwarves, elves and orcs, but these games were developed in the 1970s and 80s, and back then fantasy rarely deviated from the Tolkien formula. I think the biggest difference lies in how the two systems tackle adventuring and their world building. So I looked it up, and D&D has official adventures and campaigns, which is not really a surprise to me, as not everyone wants or can make up their own quests. But as I always understood it, and how people who do play D&D explain it to me, you are meant to create your own world and your own quests. And it's in a way telling that there are no maps on display if you visit the official Dungeons & Dragons website. There are only a couple of places featured, and it makes sense to give the players some anchor and reference points to work off from. I don't know about you, but I think I'd feel a bit lost if there wasn't anything available to give me at least a rough idea of what to expect from a D&D world. Although by now there are so many different worlds based on D&D that you can just pick and choose, I guess. And if you keep track of all your adventures, you can also turn them into books, like Dragonlance. Not too long ago, I read the first couple of pages of the first Chronicles book because my little niece was ill and reading something to her seemed to soothe her, and I just happened to grab this book. Oh man, back when I first read Dragonlance, I didn't notice just how much this feels like a role-playing session. The best touch was that goblin dying right at the beginning of the story, and I could literally see the dungeon master going, "Oh no, I can't have them figure out what this is all about just yet." And then the DM says, "Unfortunately, just as the goblin is about to tell you the name of his leader, he stumbles into your weapon. Critical hit! The goblin dies instantly." The group exchanges confused and suspicious looks. Or they explode into a laughing fit. Both are equally possible. But to also say something about the Dark Eye, I'm in no way implying that it only relies on pre-made official quests and campaigns as a sort of opposite to D&D. It's just that in this case, if you visit the official website, a map is right there. It's not a full world map actually, but that's because anything beyond the main continent of Aventuria is of little to no interest to the main game. They did release material for those parts of the world, but that stuff is separate, and apart from some of the lore, there's not much of an overlap. However, Aventuria offers pretty much everything you need for questing and adventuring. Its shape is reminiscent of Africa, including a Madagascar lookalike island called Madagascar. The continent is not that big actually, but you still get every kind of climate and a nice selection of cultures. Most of the human cultures do resemble past ones from our world, which may not be the most creative approach, but it's not a particularly uncommon thing in fantasy, especially when it comes to older world building. Overall, everything is, by now, very well defined, and there aren't that many black spaces left on the map anymore, which might sound kind of restrictive to those who are used to make up almost everything themselves. Personally, I think you can still be creative. It's just a different kind of creative, where you work within existing parameters. This kind of well-developed world building also levels the playing field for everyone, because every player has a similar image of the different regions and cultures. So if two heroes come from the same area, they don't have to make too much up. And there are no major inconsistencies because they can rely on existing material. I don't recommend getting all the regional material, especially if you're just starting. There's enough information in the base game. The rest is nice in-depth bonus that fleshes out every regional culture. Only get specific stuff for your hero, or maybe for a quest or campaign if you're a DM. I know that it's fun to read, at least I had a lot of fun with it, especially when I was younger. But with DSA, the trick is sometimes to pretend you know less than you actually do. The longer you play, the better you know the world, which is both good and sometimes maybe bad if you want to start a new group and play a very inexperienced and sheltered character. But that's going to happen with pretty much every role-playing system to some extent after some time, I guess. And it's not that you don't have to invent stuff either. You still have to provide a backstory for your character. It's just that their culture has already been created for you. Of course, if that makes you feel restricted, then maybe a system like DSA isn't for you. Personally, I don't mind working within a framework like this, as I already said. What I think is nice about the Dark Eye is that even if you switch to a different group of gamers, you don't have to adjust too much. Sure, every group's Aventuria is slightly different, but the differences lie more in the details and the overall playing style. Maybe my favorite thing is how the game makes you feel as if you're part of its world's history. There are several quests and campaigns that are then cross-referenced in other quests, and the bi-monthly newspaper Aventurischer Bote, which contains in-game news as well as additional gaming material. My group played what is probably the biggest, most epic campaign of the system that literally changed the face of Aventuria. And you look at official publications with stuff like, and a group of heroes did X, and you go, that's us, we did that. Please feel free to inform me if that also happens with D&D, but I just really like that feeling, and I'm sure other DSA players do as well. So anyway, one last thing before I shut up about pen and paper role-playing games. Das Schwarze Auge gives me this feeling of familiarity, not just because I played it for many, many years, but also because it was created by people who speak the same language as me and live in the same place. So much popular fantasy is set in a medieval Britain-inspired world, and you might think that there can't be much difference between the British Isles and Central Europe, and yes, the differences aren't massive, but still noticeable. If you've ever played one of the Witcher games, I think you know what I mean. And in general, fantasy that's inspired by non-European cultures? Yes, please. Enough rambling about role-playing games and back to the painting. I had to put a circle in the background back when I made the sketch, but for the longest time I had no idea what to do with it. So I asked which color I should go with on Twitter, but got no conclusive answer because only about 3 people follow me. Red and blue were the front runners, and after a hint from my sister I went, why not both? So I ended up with a gradient going from red in the center to blue along the outer edge. Unfortunately, the blue and the red I used don't mix into a bright purple and created that weird, muddy, unsaturated color. It took several layers, but I think I made it work in the end. To tie everything together and refine some parts, I used my trusty colored pencils. As you can see, the colors are mostly purples, blues and a touch of red with accents in gold. I knew right away that I would use my gold watercolor. If you have metallic watercolors and trouble getting pigment onto your brush, the trick is to put a couple of drops of water on the pan and wait at least a minute, or maybe longer. That way the paint can soften and you get a thicker, opaque paste. Just a little FYI if you struggle with that. Anyway, I could have done the finer lines with just a gold gel liner, but I strangely feel that I have more control of the brush than with liners and pens. But who am I kidding? Line art isn't one of my strengths, and yet I go for it again and again without actually bothering to practice it. You'd think you get wiser with age, but you definitely get lazier. I also used a copper metallic watercolor for the outline of the circle, for just a bit of bling that wouldn't distract from the gold accents. Also, one last thing before the video ends. With this video I've been on YouTube for 1 full year. Originally I hoped to upload 1 video every 2 weeks. Well, that obviously didn't work out. But that's fine. I never wanted to put myself under pressure anyway. So will I keep making more videos? Yes, I will. Still without a fixed schedule, but hopefully more frequently than in the last couple of months. The next thing I want to tackle is one of the October drawing challenges, preferably something with fewer prompts like Drawtober instead of something like Inktober. I'll try to keep track of that for new videos. Let's see. Until next time then, bye!